guys, welcome back to today's video. My name is Charlotte and this is Charlotteshelves. I try to upload fortnightly bookish related content for you, and in today's video I am nervous but excited to share a bookshelves tour video. I love watching these kind of videos. I think they are a wonderfully intimate way to learn more about your favourite booktube or BookTok creators, and it's very interesting to see what books they choose to keep or what a person keeps on their shelves and what your personal favourites are. And I also find it nerve-wracking a little bit because of that intimacy, because it means I'm going to be sharing with you my book taste, absolutely raw and open, sharing all the books that I have loved, the books that I choose to keep on my shelves, and I am offering up my book taste for your consumption. I wanted to share my absolute favourite books and some of my favourite authors, my favourite poets, and hopefully we might find some common books that we both love and we can chat about in the comments. Before I start the book tour and the bookshelf tour, please don't forget to like, comment, share and subscribe. It really helps my channel and I look forward to chatting with you in the comments. The majority of my books are in our living room, as you can see here. My bookcase is kind of divided into two, and that kind of represents the division in my taste in reading. So these top two shelves are a real mix of lit fic, classics, and maybe history books, I'd say, with a little bit of women's writing and feminist works. And then the bottom half is largely horror, true crime, thrillers. So on this top shelf, I'm gonna take you through some of my favourite books from this top. Because of the lack of space that I have to organise my books in, I haven't been able to keep them as much in the order that I would prefer to keep them in. My background is that I used to be a rare books librarian, and I worked in many different collections that used all different sorts of classifying and organisational systems, from DDC and duodecimal system to Library of Congress to older formats such as UDC, and then I worked in archives, and archival systems are very different to library management systems. So there's a tiny bit of organisation with this, but nowhere near as much as I would like, because I just don't have the space to do it. I used to organise my books by subject matter or thematically, then by author, then within that publication year. I don't need to be that rigorous because I don't have as many books anymore. This first stack at the end is, I would say, literary fiction, but a little bit of historical fiction as well. One of my favourite books of all time is actually on the top right here, and that is Cormac McCarthy, No Country for Old Men. It's the first Cormac McCarthy book I ever read, and I adored it. I think it's so near perfect. It's also one of the few books where I think the film is actually better than the book. I normally am a big lover of book first, film second, but with this, I just think Javier Bardem's portrayal of the sort of psychopathy in this is sublime. I also have some Tracy Chevaliers here. She is one of my favourite writers. This is a 5-star for me, Girl with the Pearl Earring. It's a really beautiful, subtle literary history kind of novel. It's very slow paced, it's very slow burn, and it's just incredible. I adore that one, but I think my favourite is The Last Runaway. This is so wonderful and heartfelt, and it's very tender and it's emotive, and so much of this feels like poetry. It's gorgeously written. Also, this edition that I have is particularly nice. It's a little hardback, and I like the artwork on the dust jacket. Like, it's very... Next I have The Bees. This was one of the most uniquely interesting narrative style books because it's told entirely through the eyes of a bee within a hive, and it's incredible. Like, this is such a unique book. It sounds so odd to imagine a lead protagonist as a humble bumblebee, but it's incredible, and it's also got this real sort of propulsion to it. There's a real sense of pace, and it's not quite a thriller, but it's talking about the life cycle of a bee, and as you know, that's quite short, and it's told through the season of the life of one bee and the intricacies of the hive and other things that are going on. And there's this wonderful humanizing personification of the other creatures in the hive with her that is just gripping, and I really recommend this. I think I gave this a 5-star. I got The Safe Keep. I only read this recently. I particularly loved this edition too. My bestie gave it to me. It's a wonderful book. It's definitely worth the hype, in my opinion. It's literary history set in the 60s. The main way that I would describe it is that it is peak yearning. Like, if you want a little bit of angst, a little bit of sapphic desire, this is your book. We have Crawdads, 5 stars, no other words. I also have some works by Sarah Brontës. I really adore her writing. I need to grab some more to own because I remember I went for a phase. What did I read? I read Little Stranger and what's the other one? Tipping the Velvet, and I've got copies of those at the library and I need to buy copies of them. But I think Finger Smith is probably her best book in my personal taste, and Tipping the Velvet second. They are incredible sapphic writing, and the author of The Safekeep, actually, I watched an interview of her recently. She said she was actually quite influenced by Sarah Waters. This is a super niche recommendation, but if you love the writing of Laura Ingalls Wilder, I would highly recommend this. This is like a sort of grown up, it's a pioneer type narrative of a girl who is coming of age and her adventures across the prairie, and she falls in love with a Pawnee Indian who is, I think he's mixed race, so he's kind of an outcast from his own social groups, and she also feels like an outcast in hers, and they're kind of drawn together, and it is a very heartfelt story. I thought it was beautiful, and I think this is another one that made me cry. I don't cry very often at books, so I feel like I use that as a marker as to sort of judge how profoundly moved I was by a particular work, but this is gorgeous. Next I have Her Body and Other Parties. It's a short story collection by Carmen Maria Machado. I only discovered her in November of last year when I'd read In the Dream House, and that was a 5-star book for me, and I read this, I think, this year, and this is good. I think it's a real mix because 2 or 3 of the stories are 5-star, and then I think the rest are maybe like a 2-star for me, so I struggled to give it like a good average, because I would still recommend reading this. If you love her writing, you're going to enjoy all of the stories regardless, but it's a real mixed bag. I wasn't too sure if this should sit with like women's writing section, which is kind of what we're going through right now, or whether it should sit with my horror books, but for now I've kind of popped it in the women's writings. So I've started reading more modern adaptations of sort of Greek myths, and these are some of the ones that I've chosen to keep and I've really enjoyed. I think this Medusa version by Jessie Burton is particularly interesting, and her reimagining of it is, to me, it's a bit unusual, and I think that makes it unique and definitely worth a read. Kirky is a delight, even though it's such a painful read in so many places, and A Thousand Ships was very interesting because it's told across multiple female viewpoints within this particular area of history, so you get a very rich sort of polyphonic tone from all these different women who are speaking and telling their own story. Next I have a section on Quitlit, and if I could recommend one item of Quitlit, it would be this. I'm nearly 5 years sober this year, and Quitlit, I think when you're in early sobriety, is such a good thing to sort of do. It's very empowering, it helps you stay really rooted in your sobriety, and it's also a really good book because it kind of defines this idea that you don't have to hit rock bottom, you can just reach a point where you go, alcohol isn't bringing anything to my life, and it's okay to say no, I'm just going to permanently abstain from it, and that's also a cool thing to do. This book is so incredible. I think Whitaker's writing is so vulnerable and raw, but just so honest, and that really deeply resonated with me, and this is a book that I recommend to anyone who's thinking about reconsidering their relationship with booze. I would also really recommend The Year of Less. My copy is destroyed, what have I done to this? But it's also, I would say this is a more self-help book because she's reevaluating not just alcohol in her life, but her consumption or overconsumption as such, and she is trying to approach a more minimalistic approach to life and work on her mental health, and she goes on a bit of a journey, and I think this is really great. It's quite a quiet, again, quite a subtle little book, and it was so surprising. It says, how I stopped shopping, gave away my belongings, and discovered life is worth more than anything you can buy in a store. I really love the essays and writings of Nora Ephron. She is one of my absolute favourite essayists. There's such wisdom and beauty in her essays. I think they are incredible. I reread them every other year or so. I go through all of them and just reread them again. This collection is particularly good. I feel bad about my neck. Nora Ephron is also known as the writer of many, I think she's also a director and producer, but of films like, is it When Harry Met Sally and You've Got Mail, lots of those gorgeous 90s rom-coms or sort of. This collection of women's essays was so surprising. I don't even know where I saw the recommendation for it. It's called What My Mother and I Don't Talk About, and it's really interesting essays about different women's relationships with their mothers or mother figures in their life. And whether you have a really wonderful or if you have a problematic relationship with your mother, these essays cover every type of relationship or issue, or just stories from childhood or memories of being a mother. And I thought this was delightful, and it was really interesting just to see the breadth of relationship type that other women have with other women. I would really recommend it. I'm probably not doing it I'm doing it a disservice by not describing it well enough, but this was a delight. So this section here is a chunk of like mini feminist essays, mini feminist works. I think if you are entirely new to feminism, this is a nice book to start with because it is extracts of tons of different women's feminist essays. So it's just snippets throughout history of women's writings, both contemporary and throughout history. Like I think you've even got Wollstonecraft and some more historic people referenced in this, and it's a very nice, very light overview of different women's causes and different types of feminism, because there's tons of them out there, and this lightly touches on some of those. I recommend Rebecca Solnit as the go-to writer for a lot of women's issues, because she also deals with female issues in relation to politics and sort of socio-economical problems that women face in the 21st century. I'd also like to give oh, we're really zoomed in, sorry. I'd also like to give an honourable mention to The Diving Bell and the Butterfly. This is a classic memoir. It's told through the perspective of a man who was, I think he was a very prominent Parisian or French journalist and had this incredible writing career, and then was involved in an accident he was involved in a stroke, sorry, and when he came around from it, he was in a coma, and then he realised he could only communicate through blinking one eyelid, and he wrote this book with a scribe who sat next to him and would go through the alphabet, and he would blink when he was selecting a particular letter, and that was how he wrote this book. And it is beautiful, but it is a hard read. I have a handful of books that are to do with sort of race and post-colonialism. I did like a sort of 6-month thing on it at uni when I was doing my literature degree, and one of the books that I chose to keep that I really, really adored was The Longest Memory by Fred Baguiar. He is told through the eyes of multiple different people that live on this slave or enslaved person's plantation, and it's told through different characters' eyes and how their stories kind of all interconnect. And you could read this in an evening. It is brutal, but it is beautiful, and I would just really recommend. At the end of this shelf, we have a small section on witchcraft, I would say, because my long-term hyperfixation was the 1692 Salem witch trials. I think this biography by Stacey Schiff is really comprehensive. It's just very fun. There's another Salem biography by Emerson Baker that's really good. I'd recommend that one. I also really like this particular one. It's a much older one. I think this one was published in the 70s, sorry. And it's called Salem Possessed by Boyer and Nissenbaum. And this is an early work of sort of historical research that talks about it kind of talks about the proximity to where the inhabitants of Salem lived, and how there's a history of division and bitterness and arguments and feuds that go on with the land that really affected, I think, some of the people and some of the hysteria for how. But it talks about how the lands at which people lived around Danvers and then Salem, there was a lot of feuds already going on, and it almost sounds like this just slowly built and built over the years as more and more people moved into these areas and tried to be settlers and colonizers, until eventually the hysteria of 1692 occurred. And it's a really interesting book. I would highly recommend it. One autobiography that I forgot to mention to you, again, it's got a film cover, but it is Wild by Cheryl. Empowering and sort of soul-searching kind of autobiography. And basically Cheryl Strayed, I think she lost her mother, and she talks a lot about grief, and then I think her relationship fails, and she has a number of really big things back to back that just devastate her. So she decides she's going to hike this, I think it's like 11,000, how long is it? Does it say on here? 1,100 miles of west coast of America, and she does it alone, and she's never hiked or had this experience before, and it's about her journey and her adventure and what she learns kind of along the way, and some of the people that she meets who are also hiking for their own personal reasons. And it is so inspiring and moving. And the second shelf is a really kind of awkward spot to film in, but the second shelf is entirely classics and Shakespeare stuff and a little bit of Austen and 18th century women's writings. I have quite a few books on Shakespeare. I did my postgrad and research and stuff on Shakespeare, so there's a few that I've kept that I love. I was particularly interested in the themes of lesbianism in the Renaissance, but looking specifically at Twelfth Night. That was one of my pieces of work and essays and sort of things that I was probably most proud of, and this book was really essential to my research, which is lesbianism in the Renaissance. And I love this collection of Harold Bloom. I've read it a couple of times now, and I reread it last summer, and I just loved it. It's a really nice comprehensive set of essays about, I think, every single play that Shakespeare's written, and Bloom's writing style is very accessible and easy to read. I don't know what the trends are for sort of undergrad teaching anymore, but when I was at uni we were taught in my undergrad especially, a lot of very new historicist approaches to theory, especially when it came to Shakespeare, and I think that's left me a debt of reading a lot of Professor Greenblatt's works. I do like his biography. I think it's a little dry, but we don't have a lot of information about Shakespeare, so it's hard. This was one of his more recent offerings, and I thought this was really good. I also have a copy somewhere of Shakespearean Negotiations, which is, I really love the writing also of Emma Smith. I don't find it to be as, this particular set of essays isn't as close textual reading as some of the stuff that I like to read, but I find her writing style lucid and clear, and it's just so easy to read, and it's a delight. It makes learning about Shakespeare so much more enjoyable when it's just not fusty. And there's another book of hers that I was recently gifted, and I think it's her research around the creation of the first folio, so I can't. The sonnets, my postgrad research was on, what was it called? I can't remember the official title, but it was like a quote, and it said, my love is my decay, which is a line from sonnet 80, and it was looking at themes of death and existentialism in the sonnets and the juxtaposition of death in what was essentially, the sonnet is essentially a love form. I've got quite a few books on Lear. One of my professors postgrad was also called Kinnan Ryan, and I have his book. I think this is incredible. He is a very rogue but quite Marxist, I would say. He's very interested in economic theory and power and how that is represented in Shakespeare's works, and I love. Then I have loads of plays. I don't try to keep copies of many of the plays unless I've got a lot of notes in them, because it just takes up so much room, and family and friends have offered to buy me like a big collected works of Shakespeare's entire plays, and I don't want that because the text in them is so tiny and there's barely any space for marginalia and annotation. So as I reread his plays eventually throughout my life, I might repurchase some of the ones that I don't have, because I think I maybe have 10 of his plays that I actually keep that are like my top favourites, like Hamlet, Much Ado, Lear, Macbeth. Comedy of Errors is a curious one. Titus Andronicus I really love. Merchant of Venice, yeah, Taming of the Shrew, Twelfth Night, Much Ado, is that more than 10? Henry VI Part 2 has a really special place in my heart. It was one of the first sort of real plays that introduced this idea to me of early modern examples of revolutionary thought, and there's a quote from it from one of the characters called Jack Cade that I'd really love to get as a tattoo one day, because it was a real, reading that play made me want to pursue Shakespeare further academically, and there was so much exciting, interesting, the way that Shakespeare explored revolution in that text is just incredible, and that's what made me want to pursue Shakespeare beyond my undergrad and my bachelor's. It made me want to work more in academia, and that was a play that really changed my life. One of my other literary interests is 18th century women's writing, so I've got some Frances Burney up here, some Cambridge Companions and things like that. I really like this particular set of essays that are on Frankenstein, although I appreciate that's earlier 19th century, but I used to work at a research facility for 18th century writing, and I just learned so much. I was only there for 2 years, and I learned so much in the time that I was around. So we have a lot of Austen as well. Austen is probably my favourite writer. I don't think I can have one, but she would probably be maybe my favourite. I don't know, I really bloody love Shakespeare, as you can tell, but I also love a lot of contemporary writers. How do we pick? How do we pick? I also have a small selection of Austen. I have read all her works, and I actively still try to read a lot of literary theory and critical theory around her novels, just because I want to keep up with what contemporary criticism is making of her novels. I do attend a lot of like Jane Austen type events and museums, and it's one of my main hobbies. I would say, like, I'm not a Janeite in the traditional way, like I'm not one of the girls that loves to dress up in Regency costume. I've started collecting these particular editions of Austen's works, and I think they're quite nice. They're not my favourite, but I wanted to, my paperbacks of her books were falling apart, so I wanted to collect a hardback version and have a complete set that were all the same edition, and this is the only covers that I don't absolutely hate right now, so I think I'm going to collect the rest of her works like this. I really love this biography by Claire Tomalin. I saw that Janet Todd had also recently, in the last couple of years, put out a biography on Austen as well that I'd like to get around to reading. She also wrote a biography I'm sure she wrote there's a biography of Wollstonecraft that I really love, and I think Todd was the writer of that as well. She's another one who makes biography and a lot of history very accessible, and I really, really appreciate that, because I think if something is easy to read and accessible, then you just get to share more learning about an incredible figure and a writer in history, and I want people to be able to have this information in an accessible way without it having to be dry or hard or laborious. Next to my Austens, I also have some, can you see that? Some Brontës. I really like Jane Eyre, I really like Agnes Grey, but I hate Wuthering Heights. I hate it so much. I recently tried to reread it, thinking maybe it was just one of those where I read it too young, because I read it when I was about 19. And I loathed it then, and I started rereading it a few months ago, and I struggled. I think it's one of those I might have to watch a nice film adaptation of or something, because it's so long-winded and I find it really boring. I would really love to get a collection of Bronte poetry though, because some of Emily's poetry is incredible, especially like her nature writing. And I worked on a small collection of Bronteana when I was a Rare Books intern, and it was just wonderful, and I have such fond memories as a sort of young adult, like learning about the Brontes in a really nice sort of academic setting and having access to all these resources to learn more about them. And they always had a very tender place in my heart as a result of that, because they were sort of the Brontës and Austen were kind of part of my early career when I was learning about Rare Books, so they always have a special place. An honourable mention that I forgot to reference is I really love the biographer Antonia Fraser. I think she's incredible, and her biography of the life of Marie Antoinette is 5 stars, full 5 stars. She's also written one that I do have a copy of here called The 6 Wives of Henry VIII, and I thought that was really enlightening. And if you are interested in Tudor history, but also even Shakespeare or Renaissance studies, I think it's such an essential read, and I would recommend. If I keep saying I don't have a copy of this book, or I'm realising a book is missing, it's because when we moved house we had a mould outbreak and we didn't realise, and I had set up all my books and they're a bit too close to the wall that they were originally on as well, and when we realised there was damp, the mould infected a ton of my books, and I had to get rid of so many because they would also infect other books. It's not one of those things where you can just brush it off and hope it doesn't spread. Ideally, you know, if in a rare book situation, if you suddenly have a mould outbreak, it's very dangerous and not good for the health of the books in the collection at all, which is why they're kept in special conditions. So as I'm going through this, I'm also realising there is a wealth of favourite books and authors that aren't represented and aren't here right now. I haven't got any Wilde on my shelves. I've just realised like the picture of Dorian Gray is one of my favourites as well. I loved even just the small module we did doing 19th century studies at uni and other places that I've worked. Dorian Gray is another 5-star for me, and another one that is sadly missing from my shelves. This is Editing Charlotte. I forgot to include my poetry that used to also sit on my classics shelves. I have a few editions here. I do love Wendy Cope and Caroline Duffy, but I'm currently really obsessed with this series of poetry anthologies that has been created by Sick Heart. My own edition there, as you can see, has been chomped on by my puppy. But I think there's 2 or 3 more that he has created, and they are poetry that is used as sort of medicine or a tonic to a particular ailment or problem, and there's such a beautifully curated selection of poetry. I've had a look at the second one in a shop and I need to buy it. It's so bloody good. But my favourite poet without a doubt is Philip Larkin. This is his collected poems, and he's just my favourite. He has been for such a long time. And then a close second would be James Fenton. He's really special to me because I discovered him in university, and there are certain collections of his I remember reading at a particular time of my life, and they just have a lot of meaning to me for that reason. But I think he is just phenomenal. I think he's incredible. And these 2 editions are particularly nice. They're Faber and Faber, and they look quite nice when they're together. I have one of these somewhere for W.H. Auden as well. I don't know where that's gone, because I do really like Auden, although he's quite a bit older than these 2. I've realised I've been chatting a lot today, and what I'm going to do is make this a 2-part video. So I'm going to upload a second video that will go through my horrors and my thrillers, and I will share those with you. So for this part 1, I'm just going to leave it there at the Litfic and classics and things like that. Please do join me for part 2, because I will be talking about the horrors and my thrillers and some of my other favourite books. You can never have too many favourites. Please let me know if you liked any of the books that I shared with you today so far, and please do like, comment and subscribe. Thank you.